The Fiesta Bowl. The Fiesta Bowl was wild. Wild. TCU beats Michigan. Not many people picking TCU before this game, right? Not after Michigan had gone through that regular season undefeated, not after the way that they played against Ohio State, not with winning the Joe Moore Award for the second straight year, not with their defense being statistically better than they were a year ago. And TCU came out and flat-handed it to them. TCU was terrific. I think all year long we have underestimated two things for TCU, their toughness and their speed. And I think both of those showed up in the Fiesta Bowl, their toughness and their speed. They did not shy away from any moment whatsoever. Yeah, you can say like, hey, did Michigan gain a lot of yards? Yeah, okay. And guess what? Everyone gained a lot of yards in both of those games. So it's like they were going to have to sit there and trade them toe-to-toe, and they did it. They did it. And it was really fun to watch. And then the speed. Okay, in order to beat a team as good as Michigan, what do you have to do? You got to capitalize. When there are opportunities, you got to capitalize. When they get too aggressive on defense, you got to capitalize. And they had it. They have the requisite speed. All right, that's why people saying like, oh, Georgia's going to just run them out of the building. Yeah, they might. They might. I think TCU is way better than we still give them credit for because they're fast and they are tough. They're tough at the line of scrimmage. They're a veteran on their offensive line. The defensive line did an outstanding job against Michigan's run game. By the way, Michigan, the two backs, Edwards and Mullings, 3 yards per carry after that first long run from Donovan Edwards. They had the first play of the game, boom, right down the seam. And then after that, that TCU defense was outstanding. They got the 2 pick sixes, speed, explosiveness. They were tough against the run. Those backs only had 3 yards per carry after that first rush. They did everything they needed to do. And then on the offensive side, they are fast. Even without their best back, Kendre Miller, they were able to do enough, make enough plays. Duggan, I'm just always so impressed with him. When he gets pressure in his face, he makes a play. So TCU, absolutely earned this. There's no doubt about it. They scored 51 points against Michigan in the national semifinal. Tip of the cap to TCU and Sonny Dykes. The other thing that they were able to do, because they were able to play from the lead, and this is exactly what I talked to you about before the game. All week long, I talked about, hey, TCU, what is their biggest key? They've got to play from in front on their terms, and they did that. And at least I thought it was very clear that Michigan was totally ill-prepared and uncomfortable playing a game that was not played on their terms. So you saw McCarthy panic and make some throws that we haven't seen all year long, forcing the football, 2 pick sixes. You saw the defense panic a little bit, in particular in the third quarter, and start blitzing more than what we've seen Michigan do, in particular off the edge almost exclusively. What do you have to do when you blitz off the edge? You remove your levels of defense, and then all you got to do as an offense is get one crease. So that is a high-risk, high-reward style of defensive call, and it burned Michigan because TCU was able to take advantage of it. Those were all uncharacteristic for this Wolverines team. They generally did not turn the ball over than they did it in this semifinal. They generally were able to rely on their run game. They couldn't. They generally played safe defensive concepts on first and second down, got themselves to third down, and then got aggressive. They got aggressive on first and second down. They panicked a little bit. That leads me to my next point. I think Michigan's coaching staff is going to be sick with not only their game plan, but a lot of their play calls and their overall preparedness for this game. They looked totally overconfident and inexperienced. Really good coaches on this staff and good young players. All right, this is going to be a really good team next year again. But it was pretty clear to me that they panicked a little bit in this game. Of the 4 coaching staffs in the semifinal, I think Michigan's did I don't want to say the poorest job, but they made the most mistakes from a coaching perspective. I talked about a couple there in that dialogue about TCU. Jesse Minter is a fabulous defensive coordinator. He really is. He's smart. He's a guy that has a really bright future, I thought that they got way too aggressive in the third quarter in particular. And while they were trying to mount this comeback, you got the sense that he was trying to like lay these death blows and like get the ball back right away. But by doing that, he left himself exposed and the defense exposed, and TCU took advantage. And that's why they were able to just sit there and kind of trade blows through the third quarter. I thought that was a mistake. Then we go to the offensive side. The offensive game plan inside the 10-yard line was not anywhere close to adequate. I'm sorry, like the run game in general was way too vanilla for Michigan. They did not get to their bread and butter, which I thought is like their gap schemes, pin and pull schemes. That's when you're pulling guards, pulling tackles. When they get into their gap schemes and man schemes and they get downhill, they're really dangerous, really dangerous. And they just kept running kind of just like regular zone out of the shotgun, and TCU was stopping them. And there wasn't any creativity. We didn't see a lot of zone reads out of McCarthy. I thought we were going to see him run a little bit more. We did in the second half, which kind of started to get them back into the game. They started running some more of those concepts, pin and pull, pulling guard, pulling tight end. In the second half, it got their run game going a little bit. But in the first half, they were very vanilla. It was not a team that I felt like was prepared on base downs. Therefore, what you ended up seeing is a lot of first and second down kind of meh calls on run plays. And then J.J. McCarthy would try to have to make a play on third down, and that led to mistakes, huge mistakes. One of them was a pick six. And then in the red zone, the play calling in the red zone and inside the 5, they're going to kick themselves for this. And listen, earlier in the year, and this is nothing again. Like, listen, this sounds like a big knock on their coaching staff. This coaching staff is really good. Jim Harbaugh's really good. He's one of the best coaches in college football. These young cats as coordinators are really good coordinators. Sharon Moore is outstanding. You talk about a bright future. He's got a huge future. Matt Weiss, bright future. Jesse Minter, bright future. But you know, these are young guys facing situations for the first time in their career. And I thought that the lack of rhythm showed back up. You know, the dual play calling on the offensive side. All of a sudden, you know, you had to call timeout a couple of times inside the 5-yard line. Then after the review of the touchdown, I'll get to that in a little bit, and they take the touchdown off the board. Fullback dive to a guy that was a linebacker until the Ohio State week. Like, I'm sorry. I hate the play call. And like, I know that that's firm. I really do. But in a day and age in which you can push the quarterback, you should never not run quarterback sneak inside the 1-yard line if you've got a first and goal. I mean, so what if they stop you once? Are they going to stop you 4 times running quarterback sneak? Meanwhile, if you're trying to run an under center fullback dive, just the entire ball handling of that is precarious. With a guy that was a linebacker until the Ohio State week, you know, I didn't love that play call at all. And that was a huge turning point in the game. And then they try to run Philly special. And this is this is what I would say about that Philly special. We saw Nick Foles. They did it against New England. Unless you've got a corner that's in a man technique and he's going to get drawn across the formation and leave that area of the field completely open, that play is not going to work. And we've seen it snuffed out several times now as it's been run a million times. So if you're going to have some motion in your set, then there better be a check if they're not running man coverage. If that corner is just sitting out there with eyes in the backfield and he's just a contained player, that play is not going to work. So you can't call it. You have to have a check out of Philly special if you're going to try to run Philly special, because it's totally dependent on that corner being out of position, following his man across the formation. If he's just a zone player in contain with his eyes in the backfield, that play will not work, and it didn't. And so they got no points in that. In fact, they had 3 trips inside the 10, goal-to-go situations, and came away with 3 total points in those trips. So you're going to lose. You're going to lose. And more on that red zone offense in a little bit. They're going to learn from this. They're going to learn from this. The hard part is that you've got to take your learning lessons in a semifinal. It would have almost been better if like you learned those lessons against Illinois, and like you lose that game and you learn the lesson inside the 5. You get better with your entire play calling mechanism inside the 10-yard line, and you learn those lessons, and then you don't repeat that mistake later. But they did not have to learn those lessons. And then here they are learning them when all the chips are in the middle of the table. Meanwhile, like TCU, they could have told Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator for TCU, he could have walked over and told Sharon Moore and Matt Weiss, like, hey, fullback dive probably is not the call. Like, you should just sneak it 1st and goal or even 3rd and goal from inside the 1, because he learned that lesson against Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game. But it didn't come back to haunt TCU, and here they are in the national title game. All right. Now we got to get to more overarching like topics, and they're specific to the games, obviously, as well. Okay, so I touched on one of them, the officiating. But before I get into that, I want to just, there was one issue in both games that killed each of the losers, Michigan and Ohio State, and that was their inability to convert red zone trips into touchdowns. And now it's starting to become one of the most important factors in CFP games. When you look at the last 23 CFP games, 21 of the last 23 CFP games have been won by the team that either wins or ties the red zone touchdown percentage. Okay, so can you convert red zone, not into scores with a field goal, but touchdowns? What is your touchdown percentage in red zone trips? So again, 21 of the last 23 college football playoff games, 21 of those winners of the red zone touchdown percentage goes on to win the games, winning or tying that number. You know, that's pretty telling. That's pretty telling. And you look at both of these teams, and what do? They had to settle for field goals at time. They got stoned on 4th down. They turned it over in Michigan's case inside the 5. You rarely come back from those types of moments and win the game, because it's just too hard of a hill to climb up, because you're facing a really good team. It doesn't matter as much when you're playing a bad conference opponent or a non-conference opponent. In fact, it probably doesn't matter at all, because you're just so much better than them. But when you finally get on equal footing and you're playing in a college football playoff game, that team's going to take advantage of those mistakes. And these teams very rarely get put into that position. And here they are in that position. And then ultimately, both of those teams lost, I think, in large part due to the fact that they weren't able to punch it in some of those trips.